Hey crafters! Today we're going to use some Lawn Fawn stamps and dies and create a fun reveal wheel card. So I'm going to start with a piece of paper that's 5 by 7 inches, my favorite card size. And as you can see, when the die is on there, it gives you a little bit of space around the die to expand the background. So I'm going to start by putting some candy apple distress ink in the middle of the card. And I'm going to blend that up and then add some lighter colors so that I get a gradual blend of colors. So now I'm going to put some Crackling Campfire as my mid-tone, and I'll blend that into the candy apple. And then at the very top, I'm going to blend in some carved pumpkin. So I have a gradual orange to red blend. Now the bottom half of the card, I'm going to do something slightly different. Now I like to use 5 by 7 inches cards, partly because I'm in the UK and it's easier to buy supplies this size, but also I like a big focal image on my card fronts. But you can use any size of cards that you prefer. Now once these colors are all blended, we can move on to the next step. So using a bit of Unicorn White Hero Hues pigment ink, I'm going to splatter that with a little bit of water on the background. Now this gives us that distress effect, but with a bit of white ink in there. You could always use white paint instead if you prefer. So now using a piece of craft, which I've sprayed with water, I'm going to place it in my 3D embossing folder, and I get this beautiful wooden texture. So I'm going to make sure that's completely dry and then add some ink to bring out the texture. So I'm starting with Vintage Photo Distress ink, and then Distress Oxide in Vintage Photo, and then a bit of Ground Espresso Distress Oxide. Now you can add any combination of browns or even a bit of white in there, depending on what color of wood you're going for. Now because there's a lot of ink on here, I'm going to make sure it's completely dry before I trim it and then add it to the bottom of my card. Now I'm going to just use a bit of low tack tape or post-it note tape to adhere these two pieces together. And then I can add my Lawn Fawn reveal wheel die to it. So you'll see that I have a nice wooden floor on the bottom of my scene here. And I'll run this through my die cutting machine with the semicircle add-on. Just make sure it's facing the right way. Now I like to die cut this first and then adhere it all together, but of course you can do it in the other order if you prefer. Just be careful with the washi tape on the craft paper because I find that it tends to tear, which is why I used the post-it note tape instead. So to make the reveal wheel card, you'll also need these 3 pieces die cut and another large piece, which will be plain, and this will go behind the mechanism to help it work. So the large circle and the small circle work together, and this piece will rotate and go behind the main focal image here. Now before we put these circles together with our brad, we just need to stamp our sentiment on the larger circle. So you can use a stencil such as this to help you place the stamp in the right place. I'm using a stamp from the Circle Sentiment stamp set. This one reads, "You make my world go round." So after I finish coloring this with sparkly pens, I'm going to take this smaller circle and put it behind the larger circle with some foam pads on it. And using a tiny brad, I'm going to attach the two together. Then I'm going to line up the larger circle in the window. You can see the lines that are embossed when you die cut the shape. And then put the 2 larger pieces and push them down together. And when I remove the front of the card, you can see the wheel turns perfectly. So now, in order for our die cut mechanism to work well, we need to add some thicker foam pads, and they're going to go under the wheel. These ones I will not remove the backing paper from, so it stops the wheel from getting squished and makes sure that it continues to spin, which is really good if you're going to send it in the post. Now I'm going to cover the rest of this background with this 3mm thick pads. You could always use foam tape if you prefer. And I'm just going to see if there's any more areas that I can squeeze a little foam pad onto. Some of the squares I've cut in half to make them easier to fit. Now I'm going to remove the backing paper from the foam pads and then squish the two pieces together gently, making sure that they're lined up properly. And then I'm going to test my reveal wheel, which works perfectly. And make sure you set one of these foam pads aside for later. So now I'm going to adhere the front of my card, which is 5 by 7 inches, onto a card blank of the same size. This is using double-sided sticky tape. And then I'm going to adhere the mechanism that we've just created on the front of the card as well. Then once that's on there with double-sided sticky tape, I'm going to put that extra foam square just in that little nook there and make sure it's nice and secure. Now I'm going to use a bit of PVA or white glue to adhere the arrow so that the person who gets the card turns it in the right direction. So I'm going to finish decorating the front of the card with some stamps from the Den Sweet Den Lawn Fawn release. Now these two blankets are actually from the On the Beach stamp set. And what I did is I stamped them on some really rainbow paper and cut them out just to add a pop of color to the front. So now I'm going to place them on the front where I'd like them to be. This is another benefit of using a 5 by 7 inch card because you have more space to play with and you can add more exciting images. Now once I'm happy with where all the images are, I will glue them in place with some PVA or white glue and make sure they're secure. So I used a selection of Copic markers to color in these images, and I tried to mimic the colors that were on the really rainbow blankets so that all the colors on the card meshed well together. And I also used a bit of the Crackling Campfire distress ink to ink blend over the arrow on the top of the card there. So I'm just going to trim off this book on the side here so that the edge of the card is even. And then I'm going to adhere the whole front to a 5 by 7 inch card base. And I'm going to use double-sided sticky tape for this just to make sure it's nice and secure. Then once I've adhered that, I'm going to work on the inside of the card. And I haven't decided if this is going to be a birthday card or another occasion card. So right now I'm just going to use a generic sentiment from the same stamp set, the Den Sweet Den stamp set. And I can always add a happy birthday or another appropriate sentiment later on. So the sentiment reads, "Your tops in my book." So now my card is finished and I'm just going to test the mechanism one more time. It is fun to play with after all. Thanks for joining me today. Be sure to subscribe so that you're notified when I post new videos. Have a crafty day.